What I want to emphasize is this whole issue of AI is a temporary phenomenon. As soon AI will be everywhere and nowhere, just like the internet. You won't be making a distinction between AI app and a non-AI app and an AI powered service and a non-AI powered service because there will be none. There will be no non-AI apps. There will be no non-AI powered services. And so this distinction of what is AI and what isn't from the rest of IT is a temporary distinction. It will go away soon, where we think about IT broadly as encompassing AI, and we think about large language models and agents and MCP protocols and agent-to-agent protocols as just the new tool set for IT.
Happy New Year. Welcome to today's episode of MSP Zone. I'm your host, Charles Weaver, and today we're digging into a fairly, what I think is going to be a fairly important topic for 2026 and managed service providers, and that is AI regulation, artificial intelligence regulation, the passing of a law or some sort of regulatory mechanism to address AI. And everybody's talking about AI. Everybody's threatening to do things related to AI, but we haven't seen a lot yet. We've seen some stuff from Europe. We've seen some standards coming from ISO. Even our own MSP framework has been updated with AI for some time now. But we're really waiting to see if any government acts in this area and to explore what is sure to be a very complex and Byzantine, if I can call that, I guess those are interchangeable words, about state, federal, international AI legislation. I've asked our good friend Rob Scott from Monger and Scott LLP to come back onto the MSP Zone. So, Rob, welcome back.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Charlie. Happy New Year.
To you as well. Yeah. I think 2026 is going to be an exciting year in managed services. So before we kind of get into this, want to talk about maybe the setup to all of this, which some people, unlike you and I, it's our job to kind of stay focused on these types of trends. Why would any entity, any legislative body, for example, and let's just stay with the United States, although this applies, certainly globally, why would the United States, either the states or the federal government, want to act on AI legislation?
Well, I think that the biggest thing that we've seen so far in terms of legislative reactions has to do with crimes that are being committed with AI and then privacy implications related to AI and bias and discrimination as a result of decisions taken by AI. Those are the categories that we've seen the regulators most interested in to date. But there's also, I think, this raising concern about the AI race and national security. And I think that as you think about, the geopolitical competitiveness between countries like the United States and China, for example, as relates to the AI and the economic race for superiority in terms of the superpowers, I think there is a rising sentiment that winning the AI race is tantamount to winning for national security. And I think that if you look at the landscape across those areas, consumer privacy protection to support any federal action in this area, if that's where they choose to go.
And for all the lawyers out there who just had a mental breakdown and flashback to their constitutional law days, we'll be getting into preemption in a moment. So, Rob, I want to ask a follow-up question. Do you think, at least from the United States standpoint, that first of all, I think speaking from myself and for MSP Alliance, and I would, you can speak for Monger and Scott, but I mean, I think I know your personal beliefs on this pretty well. I don't look at this as a political issue, and so I would ask, this is not a political issue in terms of how we are talking about today. This is a managed services issue, how we're analyzing all this. But there's two areas I heard you talk about where AI legislation could become important. One is on data privacy and security and certainly misuse, right? Using AI as a very powerful tool for bad ends. That's one side of it. You also mentioned And what I've heard as well is that there could be a clearing of the legislative landscape from the federal government, which is to say that the government is saying we want to act and make AI more possible. Right. I don't want to say would be counter to the first. They could both act in concert, but they are very different outcomes, or at least different approaches to AI regulation. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that, and again, not in any political conversation, but just in terms of a states' rights discussion, the federal government, I think, would, in this current mindset, might be inclined to step in if they believe that the states were enacting laws that inhibited innovation. If the basic premise is winning the AI race against fill in the blank, China, is important to national security, then the federal government is going to be loath to allow the states to pass laws that inhibit innovation in their mind. And you could, wind up with an administration that says the states aren't going far enough, just to swing the pendulum to the whole other direction. You could wind up with an administration at the federal level that says the states aren't doing enough. We're going to pass a federal law that sets the minimum standard and allow the states to build on top of that. So the federal law is the minimum standard, but it doesn't preempt state action in the field, provided that that state action is of greater protection. We've seen legislative regimes set up that way. But my point is that regardless of where the federal government stands on regulation of AI, my opinion is that they have firm ground to stand on in terms of congressional power. And that if they wanted to regulate in this area, they certainly could, but it would be inconsistent with what they've done with IT related issues, especially in the context of consumer privacy. They've allowed a complete patchwork of state laws to emerge in data breach notification, for example. They're watching similar things unfold in consumer privacy protection, state regulations. And so it's hard for me to believe that the federal government is going to want to step in with a law around AI unless it was related to what they would consider to be inappropriate prohibition of AI innovation that would lead to competitiveness concerns relative to other countries. I think that there would be a certain faction of the US government that would, if they perceive that to be happening at the states, would want to consider action in that regard.
Yeah, that's really interesting because you're right. We've had the opposite here over the last 10, 15 years where the states have been the dominant mover in terms of, you mentioned data breach notification requirements. Even now in the last several years, we've seen states act on cyber safe harbor. We call it managed services immunity, but this concept of having a minimum floor threshold for IT hygiene and security cyber hygiene, right? You would think that would be an area where the federal government would be acting, but they haven't. They've been silent. And so for the federal government now all of a sudden to say, we're going to act on this issue called AI in a very different way than we've had in the past, it certainly sets up it's a curveball, to put it mildly. You've brought up a couple terms that if you've not been through law school, you don't understand these things, but at a very high level, could you describe the Commerce Clause, the Dormant Commerce Clause, the interchange between state and federal legislative activity? And because people may be saying, well, who cares who's going to legislate? There are some very important constitutional issues at play here that impact that out.
Yeah, and I think that the backdrop of this is, during the time that the forefathers were organizing the Federalist Papers, they were receiving some pushback from the states regarding concerns that the states had that this giant, federal power would be created, and it would not only take over the states' rights to govern and to have sovereignty within their border, but also ultimately to actually invade them and take their states over. And so these were legitimate, and real concerns being expressed, at the beginning of the constitutional conventions and even prior to that.
And still are.
and still raise, think of the gun control issues. I mean, they emanate largely from the concern of the states to be able to have a well-organized militia. That's the origin of the Second Amendment. This particular concern that I'm mentioning to you is the origin of the Second Amendment. And so it would be foolish to disregard this tension between the federal government's power and states' rights, which ultimately became codified into the Constitution and is an important part of separation of powers, not only between the branches of the federal government, but in those areas where the states have the right to act. And that's where we talk about the 14th Amendment and states' rights and the relationship between the government and the states. But then it also raises this question about under what circumstances then can the federal government pass a law that doesn't infringe on the states' rights? And there's something called the Commerce Clause power. And the Commerce Clause power basically says that the federal government has the right to pass laws that impact interstate commerce. It's not something that happens entirely within a state. It's not the purview of the state to set, for example, seatbelt laws or on federal highways when it's a federal highway it's built by the federal government and connects the various states to each other. And so that's an example of something that affects interstate commerce. Well, we could certainly say that AI regulation could affect interstate commerce. And so that's why I say that I don't think that the inaction on the part of the federal government is the result of a concern over congressional power. I think it's more a policy question about what types of issues require federal intervention and what types of issues should be reserved to the states. And time after time, when it comes to computer law related regulations, what we've seen the U.S. government do is focus on regulated industries, specifically healthcare, financial services, and government contracting, and to focus on regulating government agencies and their contractors and leaving the rest to the states. And so my point about all this is that I think there's ample power under the Constitution for the federal government to act in the area of AI, whether they want to make it illegal for states to pass laws that are unduly restrictive, or in a different, type of administration to pass aggressive laws that may inhibit innovation in favor of consumer protection or other priorities. And I don't think that they're going to run into a problem in the courts on the issue of congressional power to act.
So they have the authority to act.
Yes.
The question is, will they?
That's right. I think that's the best way to frame the issue from the federal government perspective. I think they could do it if they wanted to, but their strategy to date on similar topics involving IT regulation has been to focus on the regulated areas of healthcare, financial services, and government contracting and leave the rest to the states.
Okay. So if they have the authority, even if assume that it would be challenged, but it would likely survive a challenge depending on how far they went. Should they? That's always the question. Do they have the power? Should you exercise that power? Would you, several questions, would you agree that the interrelationship between AI and cybersecurity and or IT management does exist, and that any AI policy, state or federal or international, as it's applied to certainly the larger entities, but mid-market and SMB entities particularly, there is no way or a very difficult path towards adoption and adherence to that policy without the MSPs, meaning that you can't separate AI legislation, which is actually IT security, cyber hygiene, IT management best practices, and getting the MSPs involved. Like, there's no way to separate that. Your thoughts?
Well, look, I think in the small business, anything IT that happens, MSPs are going to be the primary providers. I mean, if you think about the percentage of small businesses in the U.S. that rely on MSPs, it's a very high percentage of the SMB market. It got smaller, but still significant in the mid market, and in enterprise, it's there, but it's not as high of a percentage. What I want to emphasize is this whole issue of AI is a temporary phenomenon. is soon AI will be everywhere and nowhere, just like the internet. You won't be making a distinction between AI app and a non-AI app and an AI powered service and a non-AI powered service because there will be none. There will be no non-AI apps. There will be no non-AI powered services. And so this distinction of what is AI and what isn't from the rest of IT is a temporary distinction. It will go away soon, where we think about IT broadly as encompassing AI, and we think about large language models and agents and MCP protocols and agent to agent protocols as just the new tool set for IT. And so if you think about it from that perspective, then I would say that MSPs will be in the middle of the delivery, primarily to SMBs, to a substantial extent in the mid-market, and to a lesser extent with enterprise. And the idea that somehow AI, this new tool set, suddenly displaces MSPs, I think is very limited in its thinking, similar to the way I think that AI is not replacing lawyers. I mean, we use AI. Our practice is totally different today than it was pre-AI. The workflows that we use, how we deliver services are much different. But in the end, the lawyers still have the license. The AIs can't practice law without a license. And someone's going to be supervising the output, and it's going to be the licensed attorneys. And I see the same with managed services. I've got an AI receptionist that answers my phone at Mondra. And one of my clients sent me an email, not mad at you, just pointing out that when I spoke to your AI receptionist and they didn't transfer me to the right department, there was no hold music and I was just sitting there. And so I sent it to my AI managed service provider to troubleshoot it, and they fixed it, and it's fixed. And so this is the new reality of managed services, managing AI platforms, helping clients automate workflows and stay safer with AI. And right now it feels like a totally different animal because it's so new and different. But we went through this same thing with cybersecurity. I remember being at conferences early on and we were telling MSPs, the future is security. And they were shaking their heads saying, I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. Resources to buy it are too expensive and da 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 da. And lo and behold, cybersecurity was the driving force behind the growth in managed services over the last decade. In the same way, I believe that AI will be the driving force behind managed services in the next decade. And so I don't see this as a threat, existential threat to managed services any more than I see it as an existential threat to the law business, which has been around and withstood many, many broader challenges, the new tools. And so from that perspective, I think that a change is happening. We need to embrace it, but there's a lot of fear mongering around AI and a lot of finger waving at MSPs about what they need to be doing and not doing. And a lot of, if you don't do this, you're going to be extinct in 6 months. And I think some of that is hyperbole.
Yeah, I agree with you that it's not going to make the MSP irrelevant. My position is that it's as a policy will not be effectuated without the MSP being involved. Meaning the MSPs, because you look at the average MSP, your partners, our members, MSPs are actively fielding questions from their customers. What should I do with AI? Should I do this? Should I not do this? All right, they're already involved in the critical question. Businesses hate uncertainty. They like to know what's going to happen. So that becomes my next question to you, Rob. At some point, we're now the first week in 2026. We've had a whole year of a lot of AI, kind of news and chatter and discussion. And, are we in a bubble, an AI bubble? Are we not in an AI bubble? All that. The MSPs have a practical role to play now in advising customers on the issue of AI with pending or potential pending legislation. That may lead some MSPs to say, don't do anything. Do you have a thought on whether MSPs ought to remain dormant in their guidance, or should they proceed forward and just be ready to pivot if and when there's a legislative action?
That's an excellent question, Charles. I think laying dormant is the worst thing you can do. That being said, One of the provisions in our service attachment for managed AI is protection against future regulatory action that impacts your customer so that they can't point the finger at you. As long as the MSP and the customer know that it's the customer's project and the customer's initiative, and if it becomes illegal in the future, that's not on the MSP, then I would encourage the MSP to move forward. And the number one reason I say that, Charles, is the MSP's customers are already using AI. They're using shadow AI. They're using open systems with no supervision, with no configuration guardrails, many times accessing information that they shouldn't be accessing, and in other ways, creating loss of trade secrets, confidential information leaks, and other things that are very detrimental, hallucinations, other things that are very detrimental to the MSP's customer. And so by staying dormant, you're acknowledging the fact that your customer is engaging in activity with IT that's dangerous to them. And you're saying, I'm going to sit on the sideline while this is happening. At the very least, you got to go tackle the issue of shadow IT. And when you go to do that, they're going to tell you all the reasons they're using AI. And then you got to go implement a safe way for them to do that. In the end, what I see is the role of the MSP is to wean the customer's employees off of dangerous, open, and inexpensive platforms that are not being very tightly managed. And I'm talking specifically about ChatGPT and Copilot and other open systems that, if left unmanaged, can work harm to your customer. And so I would say it's fine to sit on the sideline if this shadow AI problem wasn't so prevalent in all of your accounts. But the fact that it is so prevalent in your accounts requires you to take action today and to go sit with your customer today and talk them through how it's being used, to give them other alternatives that are safer, that are more secure, and more likely to protect them in the future. And I don't think that any MSP that has a cybersecurity capability is unable to have that conversation with any customer, because their cybersecurity expertise is all they need to have this conversation. And I think a lot of times we say, well, I'm not a prompt engineer. I'm not a data scientist. How many people told me I needed to be a data scientist to build an AI legal assistant? And I didn't need that. But I was determined to build it for my clients because I know they needed it and I know it would help them. And so I think MSPs have the same responsibility to their clients. You know that AI is being used and it's not safe. So as the trusted advisor, you need to bring that to the customer's attention and give them an alternative that's safe.
Rob, boy, that sounds so familiar to what we went through in 2007, 8, 9, 10 with the advent of cloud applications, or what we now call SaaS. Because I remember so many discussions back at MSP World and on online forums about what's the role of the MSP with these new apps, because it was a major disruptor to the MSP way of business. And yet, look at us now. The MSPs, yeah, they had to change. They had to change, but they became relevant. They became irrelevant if they didn't change. They maintained relevancy if they did keep up with that disruption. So don't stay dormant. Inaction is not the path forward. Do something, protect yourself. Make sure, if you're not already doing it, go to Monger. If you're in our membership, go to Monger and get them to get your contracts reviewed and updated. But be prepared, Rob, for potential change, and stay with your MSP so your MSP can guide you through those upcoming changes. Fair to
Yeah,
say?
look, if I'm a small business owner, do I want an MSP that can help me navigate the AI transformation in a safe way, whether I'm a law firm or a brick and mortar or a restaurant? I mean, small business owners are dealing with the same issue. Show me a way that I can grow in a way that's not linear to headcount. Show me a way that I can be more profitable. Show me a path that's easier for me, makes my life easier, makes my employees happier. That's all they want from their MSP. They don't care if the tool is AI powered or not. They just want someone to help them navigate this transition. Start small. If the phone rings a lot, get them an AI voice assistant. If the phone doesn't ring a lot, figure out what sorts of administrative activities their people are focusing on and help them automate that. Start with basic tools that are already established, a good fit for those use cases, and implement those very high success rate use cases one at a time for your customers. We started with a basic chat bot for pilot. Here's a bot that answers like the lawyers at Monger. You could chat with this bot anytime you want. It's not connected to the internet. It only knows your agreements and the Monger knowledge bases. And that was the first use case, the basic RAG limited chatbot. And then we got good adoption with that. And then we introduced a redlining tool to help them if customers ask questions about their legal documents. Now the legal assistant can help.
I want to put your future telling hat on. All right. Do you think we're going to see a federal AI action in 2026? Good point. On the topic of national security, do you see any type of executive or federal meaning executive or legislative, either or, action in 2026 related to telling the states, stay clear of, holding back AI. We want to let it loose. We want to build up. We want, energy infrastructure, energy obviously very critical to building these AI data centers. Do you think we'll see anything along those lines in 2026? If that did happen, look, either way you cut this all bodes well for managed service providers if they are relevant in this game. If they're on the sidelines and just saying, I'm going to wait to become active in AI guidance, advisory, or management, I agree with you 100% that they're going to just stay on the sideline and probably never get into the game ever, because there's no time to be sitting this out. But if they are in the game, so to speak, I think they're going to have a very bullish year, regardless of how this shakes out, whether we have legislation, we don't, the states act, the feds act. I think that this is just nothing but good for the proactive MSP. So Rob, thank you for your time and your insight. I hope you'll come back as time permits and as need permits, because I think we're going to see something. I think we'll see some action or activity along this front from someplace throughout the year. And we'd love to have your guidance and expertise as always. Appreciate that. Couldn't agree with that more. And on that note, Rob, we'll let you go. Thank you again for your time and expertise. Folks, if you haven't already done it, go to Monger, get your contracts reviewed. After you get that, go get certified and make money. Same to you, Rob. Take care.